In the heart of the deep forest, a homeless girl unearthed a buried chest. Inside was a millionaire, still breathing. From that moment on, she didn't just save a life. She sparked a manhunt that would last for years. Harrison, Arkansas. Late spring. The leaves hadn't fully returned to the forest yet. The air was cold and dry. Faint, dusky light filtered through the tall, bare trees, their branches thin like ribs. The ground beneath was soft and damp, tangled with moss-covered roots, a place no one had any reason to wander. Emily Grace, 12 years old, hair matted, sleeves torn, dragged an old rusted shopping cart behind her. Beneath a tattered plastic sheet were everything she owned: a reused plastic water bottle, a scrap of denim wrapped around tools for scavenging, a frayed raincoat she used as a blanket, and a one-eyed stuffed bear, the only thing she had left from the orphanage. Inside the cart, a few crushed beer cans, some broken electronics, a bit of copper wire. Every day was a hunt to survive. Every day she fought off hunger, cold, and being forgotten. She was pulling the cart quickly, trying to make it back to her makeshift tent after a long day of searching. Today's haul was pitiful: a few rusted metal bits and a half-shattered glass jar. Still, in a place like this, anything was something. The wind had started to shift, early hints of winter curling through her torn clothes. She shivered, then she stopped. Something felt off, like the ground itself had moved beneath her. Emily crouched down, eyes narrowing in suspicion. Then she pressed her ear against the damp earth. Thump, thump. A faint sound, weak but distinct. Not the wind, not gravel. Metal. Coming from beneath the ground. No one had ever taught Emily to trust her instincts. But she did. With bare hands, she started to dig. Layer after layer of soft soil, tangled roots, and thick moss peeled away. Her fingernails cracked. Blood mixed with dirt. Then, wood. A panel, a rusted hinge, and an aluminum air vent. Emily pried it open. A thick, wet heat spilled out, heavy enough to touch. It smelled like mildew, like a body trapped too long. It smelled like despair that had rotted into layers. She stepped back, then froze mid-step. Her face went pale. Her eyes widened, unblinking, locked onto what lay inside. She didn't move, not from fear, but from something deeper, something worse. Terror. Her throat closed up. Her heart thrashed wildly, like it was trying to escape her chest. She couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, couldn't run. Emily stood there, small, shaking, caught between the stench of hell and the image unraveling everything she thought was real. Inside was a man. His eyes half open, staring at nothing. His wrists were bound with industrial-grade nylon. He wore a wrinkled light grey suit, collar stained with dried blood. His lips were cracked. His skin was waxy and pale, but he was still breathing. She instinctively stepped back. The smell burned her eyes. But then, his gaze, Henry's gaze, stopped her. It wasn't the look of someone dying. It was the look of someone who had once lived fully and had it violently stolen away. "Water," he whispered, barely audible, like wind slipping through leaves. Emily pulled a grimy plastic bottle from her cart and held it to his lips. He drank in slow, desperate gulps, like he hadn't tasted water in days. His trembling hand brushed her wrist. For the first time, his eyes showed something. Emotion. "I don't know who you are," Emily said, her voice barely louder than the breeze. "But if you're still alive, I'm not letting you die here." She dragged him out of the box, laid him gently on the worn raincoat. The sunlight that filtered through the branches wasn't strong, but something inside both of them burned. A homeless child had just saved the life of the most powerful man this town had ever known, though she had no idea who he was. No one knew that in that single moment, on the quiet edge of the forest, with moss-covered earth beneath her knees, a homeless child hadn't just saved a life. She had unknowingly touched the stolen lifeline of her own past. That moment marked the beginning of a journey, one written in blood, tears, and truth. A journey that would one day make all of America stop and listen. Emily had no idea that what she did, offering a bottle of water, holding a stranger's gaze, whispering a single sentence, would not only keep that man alive, but also set into motion a chain of events far bigger than she could ever imagine. She didn't know how long she sat there beside the strange man. She only knew that with every passing minute, his breathing grew slower, but it never stopped. She didn't ask why he was locked underground. She didn't ask whether he was worth saving. Because in the world of the abandoned, the only thing that matters is who's still breathing. The Harrison woods were suffocatingly silent. Emily lit a small branch, warming his hands with its flickering flame, and wrapped his thin legs with her torn raincoat. In the glow of the firelight, she saw something in him, something she couldn't name. As if between them there was an invisible fracture, once shared by the same bloodline. He didn't speak again, just closed his eyes and wheezed with every breath. Then, through the sound of wind slipping through dry leaves, came a noise, a hoarse cough, rough and raw from deep inside his chest. It was small, but enough to bring Emily closer. She didn't know that when he opened his eyes again, they wouldn't be the eyes of a victim. They would be the eyes of a man whose stolen memories were finally returning. Henry Caldwell, the millionaire long thought dead, was about to remember everything, and the story was just beginning. A dry cough broke from the man's throat. Henry tried to sit up, but his head felt like it was going to explode. Daylight stabbed at his eyes like he hadn't seen the sun in ages. Emily draped her torn jacket over his shoulders. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. There was something strange in his gaze. He wasn't used to seeing people like Emily. His world had been nothing but contracts, meetings, and money. But now, his eyes no longer held the plea of someone begging for help. They carried the weight of a man who had once ruled his world, and was now clinging to the last shred of his humanity. "What's your name?" he asked, voice trembling but deep. "Emily. Just Emily." He nodded slowly, like he was trying to etch that name into whatever part of him was still awake, because it was the only name that hadn't turned away from him before he even knew if he was alive or already dead. Emily sat down next to him, unable to hide her curiosity. "And who are you? Why were you buried alive like that?" Henry went quiet. A soft breeze stirred the trees, lifting strands of his matted grey hair. Then, with a calm, steady voice, he answered, "My name is Henry Caldwell." Emily froze. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. Henry gave a faint, dusty smile, like something cracked and dry at the edge of ruin. "I used to be one of the most influential men in real estate across the southern US, millionaire, philanthropist. The papers once called me the man who built homes for the poor and an empire for himself. But I kept away from the spotlight, from the applause. And maybe that's why it was so easy for them to erase me." His eyes dimmed. He drew in a breath, and the memories started coming back. "That night, I came home after a scholarship fund meeting. Victoria, my wife, was in the kitchen. She poured me a glass of red wine. It tasted sweet at first. Then there was this sharp pain in the back of my neck. Everything spun. I collapsed. And right before I blacked out, I heard her whisper, 'Henry, love doesn't need an audience. I'm going to keep you. Forever.'" Henry closed his eyes. His body trembled slightly, like the memory still held the temperature of fear. When I woke up, I was inside that box, tied up. They kept me alive through an IV drip. Every day, someone in a mask would come in, check my pulse, leave food, and disappear. Not a word. He raised his wrist. Emily saw the deep scar, like a wound that had never truly healed. There was a clock on the wall inside the box, always counting down, not tracking time, tracking how much of my life was left. Emily swallowed hard, holding back the storm of emotion rising in her throat. "They buried you alive?" she asked softly, eyes fixed on the scar. "You think so?" Henry let out a dry, bitter laugh, like the sound of old ashes falling apart. "You can't even imagine it. Someone hating you so much, not that they want you dead, but that they want you to exist, just to watch you die slowly in silence." The wind blew through the trees. Emily reached for her worn-out raincoat, the one she always kept rolled up in her cart as a blanket, and pulled it tighter around him. She didn't really know who this man was. Not yet. But in those tired, bloodshot eyes, behind the pain and dehydration, she saw a loneliness that looked too much like her own. Someone forgotten. Someone who never deserved to be. That day passed in silence. But in that silence, something shifted. The journey to uncover the truth and reclaim the dignity of Henry Caldwell had begun. So had Emily Grace's path to rediscover a life that had been stolen from her before she ever had the chance to live it. Emily didn't know that her small gesture, that bottle of water, that glance, that single sentence, had done more than revive a man. It had lit the fuse to something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. And as night fell over the Harrison Woods, a long-buried story of survival, betrayal, and buried memories was finally waking up. By late afternoon, the Harrison Woods began to breathe out that distinct southern chill, the kind laced with damp earth, rotting leaves, and the faint sound of semis rumbling down the highway that cut across town. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the old trees, casting flickers of light across Emily's rusted shopping cart, like a flashlight sweeping across buried memories. Emily tied the makeshift tent shut with a piece of nylon rope, just a patchwork of torn tarps and rotting wood. She gently rolled Henry onto his side, placing a pillow fashioned from an old sweater under his head. His breathing was still rough, but steady. The water bottle was nearly empty. The crumbs of bread she'd salvaged from behind the grocery store wouldn't last the night. Emily knew it. She needed help. The next morning, just after sunrise, she left Henry sleeping and pulled her cart out of the woods. The wind slapped her face like 1,000 silent reminders from society. Every step a stray kid took came with the price of suspicion. The small town was waking up the way it always did. The smell of coffee drifting from Don's diner, old country music crackling from a mechanic's shop radio. No one looked at her. No one asked her anything. She turned into the only grocery store still open, early. Run by Mrs. Mildred Harper, a 60-something woman who was ringing up cough drops for an elderly man. Emily approached the counter and pulled a beat-up phone from her coat pocket. The screen was cracked. The edges were bent. No service, no SIM card. Just one thing on it, a video recorded using the default camera app. "I don't have the internet. Just this. But you have to watch." Mrs. Harper looked up, cautious. Then, slowly, she leaned over and stared at the screen. A gaunt man, eyes wide and glassy, looked straight into the camera. His voice was hoarse, but urgent. "My name is Henry Caldwell. If you're seeing this, Victoria Langford is—" The screen went black. The clip cut off. Mrs. Harper froze. "Oh my God, he used to send me handwritten letters. Gave me $50,000 back in 2013. Said it was just to keep your little store from going dark. I never met him in person, but I heard about him all the time. He's that millionaire who helped people. quietly, donated to small towns. I was one of them. Emily nodded. She didn't know who Henry really was, but she was sure of one thing. She had saved a man worth saving. Mrs. Harper reached for the landline and dialed. "Felicia, it's Mildred. You need to get to town. It's about Henry Caldwell." On the other end, a young woman sat frozen in a free clinic exam room. The same woman whose entire medical education had been funded by a scholarship Henry Caldwell created. The sky turned grey. The wind picked up. Back on the road to the forest, Emily didn't know that the moment she hit record, an entire web of lies had started to crack, and Victoria Langford was about to face the one thing she could never control: a child. When Henry opened his eyes to the first true daylight he'd seen in what felt like forever, he had no idea the outside world had already begun to shift. And in that world, a fragile, fierce little girl was quietly paving the path for the truth to rise from the dirt. Felicia Tran dropped her pen. The hand that had been writing mid-sentence slid off the patient file. She whispered a name she hadn't spoken in 6 years, a name that had once unlocked the door to her entire life: Henry Caldwell. She owed him more than a career. He had given her the chance to escape a childhood of cramped poverty and step into the world as a doctor. It was Henry who had quietly funded the free clinic where she now sat, where hundreds of patients too poor to pay still had a place to be saved. News that Henry was alive, held captive. It couldn't be fake. And if it was true, Felicia knew. She couldn't stay silent. That night, in a secluded estate outside town, Victoria Langford sat motionless in front of a screen. The video looped over and over, the image grainy but unmistakable. Henry, thinner, ragged, being pulled from a box in the woods by a young girl. Victoria's face didn't change, but her eyes blinked too fast, the only sign of the panic coiling inside her like a vice. "Did he say anything else?" she asked, voice cold. Her assistant shook their head. Victoria inhaled deeply. Silas Drake entered the room, private attorney, unofficial lover, and the man who cleaned up every mess Victoria didn't want to touch. Trace the video's source. Find the girl. Wipe everything. She locked eyes with him. And this time, don't let her live. At a roadside bar near Harrison, Lucinda Bell sat at a corner booth with her laptop. A new article had just gone live less than an hour ago, and it was spreading fast. Henry Caldwell, philanthropist or predator, hiding in plain sight. Lucinda sipped her drink, lips curling into a smirk. She had once applied for funding from Henry's charity, got denied for faking documents. Since then, she'd hated him. A hatred steeped in old wounds and bruised pride. He turned me down? Fine. Let's see who still believes in him after tonight. In a high-rise apartment across the city, Julian Blake, a freelance photographer, dug through an old hard drive. He opened a folder labeled Caldwell 6 years ago. Inside were photos he'd taken when he'd spotted Henry near the edge of the Harrison Woods, looking panicked and out of place. Days later, Julian had a car crash. No explanation, no follow-up, no evidence. His hand tightened around the mouse just as his phone buzzed. Unknown number. A voice, low and rough. If you still have the photos, hand them over. Or lose more than your reputation. Chills ran down Julian's spine. For the first time in years, he felt hunted. The next morning, deep in the Harrison Woods, Emily pulled the worn raincoat tighter around Henry's frail body. He had fallen asleep after a feverish night. She hadn't slept at all. The feeling of being watched lingered around her like the whisper of the forest. Her instincts screamed. They were running out of time. She made a decision. Emily ran down the dirt path toward town, straight to the old sheriff's station. She pushed open the heavy door and found a middle-aged man with his feet kicked up on the desk, eyes glued to the TV. Deputy Carl Bridges. "Sir, someone was buried alive in the woods. I pulled him out. He's alive. His name is Henry Caldwell." Carl lowered his feet and gave her a once-over. Dirty clothes, smudged face, no ID, no adult in sight. "You got any paperwork?" Emily shook her head. "Any guardian with you?" Another shake. Carl shrugged. "Maybe he's senile, or maybe you're just imagining stuff. Lots of folks get lost in those woods." "No. He had an IV, a box. It was like a coffin." Carl raised his hand, cutting her off. He'd heard enough. "Go home, sweetheart. Don't stir up trouble." Emily stood still. No one believed her. No one listened. She turned and walked out. No tears. But something inside her cracked. 2 days later, at that same desk, Carl muted the TV when a breaking news ticker flashed across the morning broadcast. Miracle or hoax? Henry Caldwell, presumed dead, found alive. His face went pale. 2 days ago, a little girl had shown up, no address, no papers, talking about Henry. He'd ignored her. That afternoon, a thick envelope marked "Anonymous Source" appeared in his desk drawer. He didn't need to open it to know what it was, or why he'd be expected to stay quiet. Carl pulled out the slip of paper Emily had scribbled on. He'd kept it, planned to burn it. He lit a match. The flames began to curl the edges. But when the fire reached the name Henry Caldwell, his hand stopped. Something deep warned him. This time, if he stayed quiet, he wouldn't just lose his job, he'd lose his freedom. "If this breaks," he whispered, "I'm going to prison." From the shadows of the Harrison woods, a figure placed a quiet phone call. "They've been located. The girl and the old man, both still alive." The voice on the other end was ice. "No more hiding. Start the job." The hunt had officially begun, and this time, the predator had shown its face. Under the thick canopy of the Harrison forest, where so many crimes had been buried, only fleeing footsteps remained. But Emily was never the type to run and hide. She chose action. She chose to get Henry to safety, even if no one stood with her. Emily doesn't know where you are when you hear this story. On a bus, in a cramped little room, curled up under a blanket, hoping for some kind of ending to your own story. Drop a comment. Who knows? Maybe Emily's out there too, listening somewhere between the lines. She may not know your name, but if you've ever felt small, invisible, forgotten, then maybe you'll understand why a 12-year-old girl couldn't turn her back on a stranger in the woods. The next morning, a pale light filtered through the trees of Harrison Forest, streaking across the thin layer of mist in soft, silver-grey ribbons. Emily knew they couldn't stay. Not after last night. She quietly packed up. The raincoat, the stuffed bear, the last bottle of water. Henry was still asleep. She loaded him into the rusted shopping cart, draped a mesh cloth over his face. She used to think the forest would be her forever home, but now she was the one searching for a new place to hide. She didn't go back to Mildred's store. Too obvious. Instead, she chose an abandoned supply shed behind an old barbershop on 9th Street. The wooden door was broken, but it held. It was cold and damp inside, but the electricity still worked. She laid the raincoat down as a mattress, covered him with an old sweater. Henry woke under the faint yellow glow of a cracked ceiling bulb. "Where are we?" he asked weakly. "A safe place, at least for today." She broke the last piece of bread in half and cleaned the pus-filled wound on his arm. Henry gritted his teeth through the pain. Emily even boiled water, using an old trick she'd picked up during nights spent in the back alleys of industrial zones. She stripped the wire from a broken fan, plugged it into the socket, and used wrapped cloth as makeshift gloves to avoid getting burned, while treating his deeper scrapes. Henry stared at her in disbelief. "Where did you learn all this?" Emily gave a small shrug. "I didn't. When no one helps you, you learn to help yourself." She paused. Then, more quietly, "There were people. They tried to grab me. When I was sleeping under the bridge. A few times. One guy said I wasn't going to live long. The cops didn't believe me. One time, this woman with blonde hair pulled up in a black car. Couldn't see her face, but I knew. They're scared I'm still alive." Henry looked at her for a long moment. He didn't know the whole story, but deep down, a terrible sense of foreboding was starting to grow. "You may not be a doctor, Emily, but you saved a dying man. You've already done more than most ever will." Meanwhile, Silas got the update. The forest camp was empty. Back at the estate, Victoria smashed her wine glass and shouted, "This girl isn't just lucky, she's a threat." Lucinda published her second article. Carl came under internal investigation. Julian received a second death threat. The entire web of corruption was beginning to unravel, one rotted thread at a time. Back at the storage shed, Emily sat beside Henry, her back pressed to the wall. Outside, a black SUV pulled up silently. A figure in grey stepped out. No footsteps, no sound. The game of hide-and-seek had entered its most dangerous phase. In times like these, when survival hinges on moments, sometimes it only takes a single detail. A freckle, a scar, a truth. For Henry, what he saw in Emily was no longer coincidence. There was a bond, one deeper than fate. A bloodline reaching back through silence, now rising up to reclaim its voice. In the damp chill of the old storage shed, Henry awoke to the dim flicker of the ceiling light. He turned his head and caught a glimpse of Emily asleep in the corner of the blanket. Her hair spilled gently across her face, her small features tilted slightly to one side. A narrow beam of light landed on the edge of her left eye. Right there, a dark mole stood out. Henry froze. A memory surged forward, uninvited. That mole. It was identical to the one Anna had. The same spot. The same size. He remembered the first time Victoria met Anna. She had said it like a prophecy. "Look at this. A mole right at the corner of her eye, just like your first daughter, the one you lost, like fate gave her back to you." Back then, Henry had been overwhelmed. His wife had passed shortly after childbirth, leaving behind Anna, the child he had raised, believing with all his heart she was his own flesh and blood. Victoria had embraced Anna like her own, and Henry had been grateful. He'd had brief doubts, moments when things didn't quite add up, but Victoria's gentle voice and unwavering patience had always pushed those questions aside. Now, in this dim yellow light, with Emily's bruised face resting under a blanket, something stirred in Henry. Something deep, something primal. It wasn't just compassion, it was connection, sharp, wordless, and agonizingly real. He didn't want to think further, but part of him couldn't stop. This girl. Why does she look so much like her? He murmured. Emily shifted in her sleep, murmuring faintly, "Don't leave me." The words hit Henry like a shockwave, a cry from somewhere in his past, long buried but never forgotten. The next morning, Henry was already sitting up when Emily slowly blinked awake. Outside, the sky was grey, heavy with silence. Then, a soft knock at the door, followed by a familiar voice. "It's Mildred. I didn't come alone." The door creaked open. Mrs. Mildred stepped in, accompanied by a small girl with curly brown hair, nervous, wide-eyed, clutching the sleeve of her coat. "Sarah Caldwell. She came to my shop last night," Mildred explained. "Said she ran away from home. Said she was looking for her dad." Henry's heart stopped. Sarah stepped forward, then burst into tears. I heard Mum talking. She said she locked you away, so no one would know you were still alive. I didn't know what to do, but I miss you." Henry dropped to his knees and opened his arms. Sarah ran into them, clutching him like she might lose him again. Her tears soaked into his shoulder. He held her tight, silent. Behind them, Emily stood quietly, watching. Henry said nothing, but his eyes drifted back to Emily, to the mole, to her eyes, to that unshakable familiar pull. And in that stillness, he made a decision. He turned to Mildred, speaking low. "I need to stay here with both girls. For now. I need to reach out to the people who are looking for me, but quietly. No one can know I'm alive." "Not yet." Mildred nodded. She didn't ask questions. She simply closed the door behind her, as if sealing away the past and quietly opening the first page of something new. A journey not just to survival, but to reclaim the truth that had been stolen. In the pale light of a new morning, Henry knew he couldn't wait any longer. It was time to face what he feared. And sometimes, to know who a child really is, you have to accept truths you never dared to believe. Early morning at Mrs. Mildred's house. Dew still clung to the window panes, and the crisp crackle of toast echoed softly through the corners of the old kitchen. Henry sat silently at the wooden table, his gaze fixed on a small crack in the glass, as if staring into the fracture running through his own memory. Emily and Sarah sat nearby. Sarah clutched her worn-out teddy bear, while Emily scribbled aimlessly on an old newspaper, drawing crooked lines without meaning. No one spoke. It was as if every sound had been hushed, making room for a quiet storm that hadn't quite arrived, but was already near. Henry watched the two girls. Sarah, with her curly brown hair and sharp, sensitive eyes, was the one child he was sure was his. She looked just like Victoria had as a child, but his eyes lingered longer on Emily. Not just because of her bravery, but because something in her felt painfully familiar. A memory flickered. Anna, the little girl he'd raised as his own with his first wife, used to sit just like that. Same quiet posture, same way of tilting her head, same eyes, carrying a sadness far too old for their age. And then the question came, sharp and sudden. What if Anna had never really been his child? What if the girl in front of him, the one abandoned, the one who had saved him, was the one he was meant to find all along? The thought clenched his chest tight. Had he spent all these years living beside a lie? Henry turned to Mildred. "I need a phone. Untraceable. No registration." Mildred nodded. She understood. Some calls aren't for phone companies. They're for the past. A little while later, she returned with a dusty flip phone and an old notebook with yellowing corners. Henry flipped through the pages, names of people who owed him a promise or a memory. On page 3, he stopped. Luis Ortega, private investigator, Boone County. He dialed. The ringtone buzzed through the silence. Henry gripped the phone tightly, eyes shut. A long breath, like he wasn't just calling a person. He was calling a former version of himself. "Ortega, it's me, Henry Caldwell." Silence. A chair scraped. A glass shattered in the background. Then a breathless voice. "Jesus Christ. I thought you were dead. I'm alive. But I need to know what I lost while I wasn't." Henry explained, briefly. The girl. The box. The mole near her eye. The growing suspicion that refused to leave. "I need you to help me confirm who she is." Ortega exhaled slowly. "Send me a hair sample or something with her DNA. I've got someone at St. Clair Hospital who can run a quiet test." Later that afternoon, Ortega arrived. His coat was streaked with road dust, his stance stiff as always. But his eyes were sharp. The same. They sat together like two men who'd survived an explosion no one else knew about. I dug up the original birth records, Ortega said. 2 girls, Emily Grace and Anna Caldwell. Same day, same hour, same hospital. He paused. And here's the part that'll shake you. Emily's mother's name on file was written over by hand. Anna's file, it had the official tracking code, except the parental DNA match was missing. Henry went still. The teacup in his hand trembled. Ortega pulled out a small Ziploc bag. Inside, a folded original document. Someone tried to erase the trail, but they cleaned it too well. Only someone with total access to hospital records could pull that off. One name crossed both their minds at the same time. Victoria Langford Caldwell. Emily sat nearby, too far to hear clearly, but something made her look up. She stepped closer to Henry, still clutching her teddy bear. Before Ortega left, Henry walked over to Emily, who had dozed off against the wall. He knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he gently touched her tangled hair. With near sacred care, he picked a single hair off her old coat. He wrapped it in a clean tissue and slid it into a small envelope. "Don't hate me for this," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "If the results tell you something no one ever dared to say, at least for once, you'll know who you are." He stood slowly, the envelope in his hand. It was light, but it felt like he was holding a piece of his own heart. "I'm okay, if you need to know who I am." Henry looked up. His eyes met hers. And in that moment, the silence between them was louder than any scream he had ever known. "You don't have to prove anything," she said softly. "But this time, you deserve the truth." Ortega watched them both, then slowly stood. "I'll run the test, but it'll take a few days. In the meantime, you need to prepare yourself. If this turns out to be real, Victoria won't stay quiet." Henry nodded. There was no hesitation now. In his eyes was the steady fire of a father, a man whose life had been stolen, and who was ready to take it back. "This time, I won't let anyone take anything from me again." The truth had already started to spread. There was no containing it now. Those who once manipulated everything from the shadows were beginning to show their faces. And Emily, the child who once had no name, was now at the center of a storm for justice. 2 days later, after the DNA results came in, headlines flooded local papers and regional news stations. Henry Caldwell alive, not a hoax. Arkansas radio stations were overwhelmed with calls, supporters, skeptics, outraged citizens demanding accountability for the lies they had once believed. Before the press conference, Henry contacted an old friend, a retired news producer who helped organize the event at the city's media center. That morning, Henry walked out before a wall of cameras. He adjusted his collar. His voice didn't shake. His eyes were steady. "My name is Henry Caldwell, and I was never dead. I was imprisoned, betrayed, and buried alive, inside the very empire I built. Today, I stand before you to say that truth cannot be buried forever, and I will see this through, to expose and prosecute those who tried to steal my name, my fortune, and my daughter." The room fell completely still. Only the sound of camera shutters clicked steadily, like the slow, certain heartbeat of justice returning. At the Caldwell estate, federal agents and state police burst through the doors before dawn. Victoria Langford Caldwell was handcuffed in her bedroom, her eyes wide, not in shock, but in realization. She had always known this day might come. Silas Drake, standing beside her, didn't resist. When questioned, he simply said, "I'll talk. Everything. I want a reduced sentence." He led agents to 2 hard drives hidden behind a mural, containing recordings of secret meetings, financial transfers, and videos that proved Victoria had masterminded Henry's captivity. Daniel Voss, The Caldwell Corporation's head of communications was already waiting at the FBI office. He lowered his head. "I have internal documents. I know what I did was wrong, but I won't let a child be buried under our silence." Lucinda Bell, once a socialite leader of Arkansas's elite, was removed from every membership list within 24 hours. Major publications severed ties. Her accounts were suspended across all social platforms. A formal statement read, "Due to defamatory actions and promotion of false narratives, Lucinda Bell no longer represents the values of this community." Lucinda read it in silence, then screamed, hurling her laptop across the room. But it was too late. At the Arkansas State Courthouse, an emergency hearing was held. Alongside FBI evidence and witness testimonies, an unexpected figure stepped onto the stand. Dr. Felicia Tran, community physician, former scholarship recipient, and the doctor who supervised the DNA testing. She presented the official report. 2 samples, one from Emily, one from Henry. 99.98% match. But what shocked the courtroom more was the original medical file. Emily had been born at the same hospital, same day, same hour, as Anna, the child who had lived her life as Henry's daughter. "The hospital records show tampering," Felicia said. "Emily's birth mother's name was altered. Anna's file contains no DNA evidence linking her to her father. This kind of manipulation would have required internal hospital collusion or outside influence." The courtroom fell silent. Then, Dr. Felicia Tran clicked to the next slide on the projector screen. A close-up photo appeared, a mole beneath Anna's eye. "We had this examined by a dermatological specialist," Felicia said, voice steady. "This mole is not natural. Beneath the skin's surface, there are traces of synthetic ink, evidence it was tattooed at a very young age, possibly before the child turned 1. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Felicia turned her gaze directly toward Victoria Langford. "You didn't just swap 2 children. You engineered their resemblance. This wasn't an accident. It was orchestrated, intentional, and cruel." Lucinda Bell, who thought she was just a pawn in someone else's scheme, had been played as well. Victoria had sent her a forged email offering temporary access to a secret business account, complete with login credentials. Lucinda, suspecting nothing, logged in from her personal laptop. The financial system immediately flagged the breach. Within minutes, a financial crimes task force stormed her high society luncheon, handcuffing her in front of a dozen news cameras. "I had permission. I have the confirmation email," she screamed. No one believed her. Watching the news from Mildred's living room, Henry Caldwell said quietly, "The wicked always think they're the smartest until they meet someone even more wicked." Back at the courthouse, the most unexpected witness took the stand. Sarah Caldwell, just 7 years old. Her voice was soft but shaky as she recounted what she remembered from the Caldwell estate, the place where her mother had kept her father locked in the basement. "Mom told me not to go down there, but I heard someone crying. I thought maybe Dad was sick. I didn't tell anyone." The courtroom sat in stunned silence. The jury exchanged looks. No child could fabricate details like that. Her words cut through years of lies like a blade. Henry turned to Emily. He said nothing, just reached out and held her hand tighter. "You'll never be forgotten again," he whispered. The next morning, sunlight flooded the small back room of Mildred's home. Henry sat in silence, staring at a sealed envelope, the final DNA results Ortega had brought over that morning. Emily stood nearby, anxious. Sarah clung gently to his arm. Henry opened the envelope. His eyes scanned the page. His hands trembled. His lips pressed tight. Then he looked up, locking eyes with Emily. "It's true. You're my daughter. You're Emily Grace Caldwell." He broke down, not with grief, but with release. The cry of a father who had finally found the piece of himself he thought was lost forever. He wrapped his arms around Emily. She froze at first, then, as if her body remembered something her mind never knew, she hugged him back. A real embrace. One they should have had 12 years ago. An embrace warm enough for both of them to cry. Not out of sorrow, but because they'd finally been found. Sarah stood beside them, smiling softly. No jealousy, no sadness. She reached for both their hands. "Now our family's even bigger," she said. 1 month later, at the Arkansas Supreme Court, the conspirators were brought to justice. Victoria Langford Caldwell stood in handcuffs, head bowed, as she faced charges including conspiracy to kidnap, unlawful imprisonment, child identity fraud, and grand larceny. The courtroom played audio recordings from Silas Drake, visual evidence collected by Ortega, and the heartbreaking testimony of little Sarah. All of it shattered Victoria's last line of defense. Silas Drake, once her personal attorney and accomplice, agreed to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. He detailed the baby switch, financial transactions, and the full list of medical staff who had been bribed. Daniel Voss, the Caldwell Corporation's head of communications, turned himself in before the trial began. He surrendered documents that proved Victoria had ordered the suppression of internal reports and whistleblower complaints. Lucinda Bell, once the face of elite Arkansas philanthropy, was expelled from every charitable board and blacklisted by major media outlets. When a witness exposed her for spreading false narratives and defaming innocent people, Lucinda broke down in court. She screamed, sobbed, and pounded the defense table. But it was too late. Deputy Carl Bridges, the former sheriff's deputy, was exposed after a review of suspicious financial transactions. When questioned, he didn't deny it. He simply said, "I thought she was just another street kid." Julian Blake, the freelance photographer, stood before the court and admitted to deleting photos of Henry after being threatened. He bowed his head, facing both Henry and Emily. "I was a coward," he said, "but I'm not anymore." Emily began a new life. For the first time, she got to go to school. She sat next to Benji, a former street kid who once shared a blanket with her under Bridges, now adopted and cared for, just like her. Sarah, Emily, and Benji lived with Henry at the Caldwell farm, once abandoned, now transformed into a true home. Each morning, Emily woke not to car horns or the pounding of rain, but to the sound of roosters and the smell of fresh toast. Together with Emily and a close circle of trusted allies, Henry founded the Grace Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to helping homeless, abandoned, and trafficked children. The sign at the front gate read, "Grace Foundation, where every child deserves to be called by name." A few weeks before the formal trial, something shook the Caldwell family to its core. Sarah was nearly kidnapped at school. A strange man had been waiting outside the gates, holding a bag of candy and a small note that read, "For you, from Mom." At first, Sarah hesitated, but something inside told her to step back. When the man moved toward her, a school security guard intervened just in time. Surveillance footage later confirmed the license plate belonged to a shell company, one that had received funding from a foundation Victoria secretly controlled. Henry's fist clenched. "She'll stop at nothing, even using her own daughter as bait." He turned to Emily. This time, he wasn't backing down. No one can rewrite the past, but everyone can choose how the present shapes the future. In that first embrace, Henry and Emily didn't just find each other again. They reclaimed something far greater, hope, not just for themselves, but for an entire generation the world had tried to forget. 3 months later, the Grace Foundation officially opened its doors. Statewide media covered the story. Several national news outlets sent reporters, And the story of Emily, the girl who once had no name, became a symbol of unshaken hope. The courtyard of the Caldwell farm lit up with stage lights. The crowd filled every space. Henry stepped onto the stage, but the spotlight didn't land on him. It stopped on Emily. She wore a simple white dress, her hair neatly braided, a microphone in hand. There was a time I didn't have a name or a place, but today I have a family and a purpose. Her voice trembled slightly, then grew steady. Grace Foundation isn't a place for pity. It's a place to begin again. A place where every child has the right to be heard, to be named, and to be loved. Benji and Sarah waved from the front row. Henry wiped his eyes. Backstage, volunteers hugged one another. Camera flashes exploded, capturing a moment America would never forget. Emily, once invisible in the cold streets, now stood as a face of resilience. Schools began inviting her to speak. Humanitarian organizations reached out to partner. The press called her the voice of the forgotten. But Emily always replied humbly, "I'm not a hero. I survived. Now, I just want to be useful." In a small house a few miles from the farm, Anna, the girl who once lived under Emily's stolen identity, was now being raised by a trusted foster family. Though her biological mother, Victoria, was serving time, Anna was never blamed. She went to school, received therapy, and often visited Sarah and Emily. During a fall picnic, Anna once asked Henry, "Was I a mistake?" Henry knelt down, meeting her eyes. "No, sweetheart. You are part of the truth, and you deserve to be loved, not because of who gave birth to you, but because of who you are." That night, Henry stood alone in the backyard. Emily walked up and handed him a cookie. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Dad." Henry turned. He froze, not because of the word, but the way it sounded. For the first time, it wasn't "sir," or the quiet distance between a stranger and a savior. "Dad, thank you for not giving up on me." Henry dropped to his knees, pulled her close. His shoulders trembled. For the first time in his life, he felt forgiven, not by words, but by the unconditional acceptance of a child who had once had nothing. "I owe you a childhood," he whispered, "and I'll spend the rest of my life giving it back to you, every day, every meal, every bedtime. I promise, I snuck this from the party," she smiled, holding up the cookie. "Better than any feast," Henry grinned. They sat on the porch together, saying nothing, watching the distant lights and a sky full of stars, as if, finally, the world had made space for them. "Love can lose its way," Henry said softly, "but it always finds a way home." Emily leaned against his shoulder. There were no cheers, no fanfare, only the warm night breeze and the quiet peace that opens the first page of a new chapter, where truth, justice, and family are no longer luxuries. 2 years later. On a chilly morning, Henry drove Sarah and Anna to the Arkansas Women's Correctional Facility. He didn't say much, just gripped the wheel tightly, eyes on the road. He still harbored resentment for Victoria, for imprisoning him and stealing his daughter. But he believed the girls deserved to see the woman who had given birth to them, to know they were never a mistake. In the visitation room, Victoria Langford Caldwell entered with graying hair, wearing a pale prison uniform. Tears welled in her eyes when she saw Sarah and Anna. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice raspy, "for hurting you, for turning everything into a nightmare." She turned to Henry. "I know I don't deserve it. But if you can, please tell Emily. I'm sorry. She lived a life I stole." Henry didn't answer. He simply placed a hand on each child's shoulder. "Let's go," he said. Weeks later, Henry took Emily to a small cemetery just outside town. He stood before the grave of his first wife. the kind woman who died sick before the truth could ever come to light. "I failed you," he whispered. "I believed the wrong people, and you died with your name buried beside you. But Emily is home now, and I'll love her for both of us." Emily gently placed a white flower on the headstone. Her eyes shimmered. "I'm sorry I came late, Mum, but I'm here now." 15 years later, the Grace Foundation had become one of the largest non-profits in America. Each year, thousands of homeless children were rescued. Hundreds of families reunited. Henry, now one of the country's most respected philanthropists, was no longer known for wealth, but for his heart. Emily, now a calm, intelligent young woman, officially took over the foundation. She sat in the same office her father once used, but nothing had changed. The photo of their embrace on opening night still hung on the wall. Benji became head of communications. Sarah majored in child psychology. They weren't just family. They were survivors, healed by love, bonded by courage, and strengthened by forgiveness. Every year, on the anniversary of the day Emily found that box in the woods, they gathered together. They lit a single candle. To remember, love can lose its way, but it always finds a way home. If you've ever felt forgotten, if no one ever said your name, or you believed your story wasn't worth telling, believe this: healing begins with one small step. And maybe, just maybe, you are someone's light, just like Emily was Henry's. If this story touched something in you, share it. Someone out there is still waiting to be seen, to be rescued, to be loved. The world is growing quieter, but the past hasn't closed, because with every truth revealed, a shadow long hidden demands its turn in the light. And this time, Emily will face something larger than herself, a system of stolen identities that's been hiding in plain sight for decades. One winter night, wind whipped down from the Ozark Mountains, biting through skin and silence alike. The Grace Foundation farm sat still, as if asleep. But just beyond the gate, a man in a worn leather jacket and low-pulled knit cap stood quietly in the shadows. His name was Mason Drake, younger brother of Silas Drake. More than a decade ago, Mason had served as a senior security specialist at the Caldwell Corporation, then vanished without a trace after Silas's arrest. No one knew that Mason had been the first to warn Victoria about the risk Emily posed. It was Mason who had broken into the orphanage years ago, stolen Emily's original records, and staged the fake accident that erased her identity. Now he had returned, not to bury the past, but to make it right. He carried more than just a bag of documents. He carried the weight of everything he'd tried to forget. A faded scar still marked his left wrist, a reminder of the last time he had defied Victoria, and been cut out of the so-called Bloodline Project. He'd spent years living off the grid, drifting through refugee shelters, working as a night shift security guard near the Mexico border. Emily, alone that night in the archive room, was reviewing unsolved records from the Foundation's latest campaign, Project Find Me, a new initiative to help trafficked, lost, or swapped children reclaim their true identities. She didn't know that just outside the gate, a man stood holding the last pieces of the truth about her and others like her. Benji spotted Mason while checking the security feed. Instead of calling the police, he brought Mason inside, under watch. In the meeting room, Mason sat still, hands folded. His voice didn't shake, but his eyes were red. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," he said. "I'm here because I can't let this happen again." Emily sat in stunned silence as Mason pulled a folded paper from his coat, a handwritten copy from the personal journal of Nurse Rosemary, the woman who had once cared for both Emily and Anna as newborns. He also brought cassette tapes, old recordings of conversations between Silas, Victoria, and high-ranking hospital staff at a private facility in Little Rock. On one tape, Victoria's voice rang out clearly. "Do it as planned. The one with the mole will be Anna. The other will erase her name." Henry was alerted immediately. He called Ortega, Felicia, and a legal team to verify the evidence. At the same time, the first copies were sent to the FBI. One of the tapes revealed a voice not previously identified, Leonard Gresham, chairman of the hospital board during the year of the switch. His name had once appeared in internal disputes before the hospital was sold. Mason's testimony rocked the media. The press called it the largest identity fraud case in Arkansas history. Dozens of parents whose children were born the same year as Emily began contacting the Grace Foundation, hoping to learn the truth. Emily and her team launched the Emily Project, not just named after her, but because her name had once been stolen, and was now a symbol of reclaiming identity for others. They gathered DNA samples, recreated old hospital floor plans, verified every tampered document. Within 6 months, the Grace Foundation had reunited 18 children with their biological families. One was a boy who'd been raised by a secretive organization posing as a charity. He'd been forced to change his name, had never seen a photo of his birth mother. Emily personally visited the home of Lorraine Jameson, a nearly 60-year-old woman living alone with a faded photo of her missing son from 2011 still hanging by the door. When Lorraine opened it and saw Emily and the boy, she stepped back, eyes blurring. Then she wept, wordless. The boy hesitated. "I'm not sure, but Miss Emily said..." Lorraine wrapped her arms around him. "You don't have to be sure. I know you're mine." After that reunion, international media began to take notice. A radio station in the UK invited Emily for a live interview. When asked what she would say to people who believed a street kid couldn't change anything, she simply said, "Sometimes, all it takes to change the world is one person who refuses to turn away from the truth." When Emily placed her hand on the final file that night, she was no longer the child who once had no name. She was a symbol, the last voice for those who had never been heard. Inside the Grace Foundation, Emily mounted a large wooden plaque engraved with the words, "Every file is a real person. Never forget." But the more names they uncovered, the more haunted she became. How many children were still out there, switched, lost? How many Victorias had yet to be exposed? One night, she woke from a dream. Back in the orphanage, empty cribs, distorted name tags, files half burned. When she opened her eyes, she made a decision: to launch a full-scale independent investigation. She began working directly with federal law enforcement and civilian forensic centers across the country. Henry worried. "Sweetheart, you can't save the whole world alone." Emily took his hand, her voice steady. "I know. But if I don't try, another child might end up buried in the woods." The Grace Foundation opened 3 new branches in Missouri, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. Each was staffed by at least one child Emily had once helped rescue, now grown, now returned, now volunteering to help others. Some had suffered deeply from stolen identities, but now stood before crowds and shared their journeys. Not as victims, but as survivors. Benji was now Director of Communications. Sarah, after earning her degree in child psychology, returned as Director of Trauma Recovery. She launched a program called Healing Through Truth, teaching children how to recognize, confront, and process identity-related trauma. Emily kept her modest office unchanged. Universities often invited her to speak, but she still reserved 1 day a week just to read handwritten letters from children across the country. One letter made her cry. "My name is Lily. I don't know who my parents are, but if there's someone like you, Miss Emily, I'll wait. I'll wait for someone to find me." Emily wrote back, "Dear Lily, some children are born in the mud, but they're still the seeds of flowers, And one day I, or someone like me, will come. We promise. Ortega uncovered a page from Nurse Rosemary's old journal, the nurse who had once opposed the baby switching plot. She had passed away from heart failure, but in her drawer was a notebook. The final line read, "I couldn't save Emily, but I believe one day she'll save herself. And she'll save others too." Emily placed the journal in a glass case at the Grace Foundation's entrance. Beneath it, she handwrote a single line, "Memory doesn't die. It just waits to be named. Once buried, now named." Emily had become a beacon for hundreds of other children. At the 10-year anniversary of Grace Foundation, Henry took the stage. He looked at Emily and said, "I once lost an empire because I trusted the wrong person. But because I trusted a child, I gained everything back." The room erupted in a standing ovation. Emily didn't cry. She smiled, as if every scar she carried had bloomed into something that could heal others. Because sometimes the only way to truly heal is to help someone else find themselves. 7 years after Victoria's conviction and Grace Foundation's international expansion, Emily received an unexpected letter. No return address. A brown envelope, its paper worn, its ink faded. But the slanted, firm handwriting stopped her cold. It looked just like the signature from the hospital file, from her birth mother. "Emily Grace, if you're reading this, I may no longer be alive. But if you are still out there, you deserve to know the truth. I tried to keep you, but they took you in the night. That year, I was threatened with death if I spoke. I wasn't strong enough to protect you. Please go to Cabin 15, Rosefield, Missouri. Everything you need is there." Emily sat frozen for hours. The letter lay on her desk like the heartbeat of a memory that had never formed. She decided not to go alone. Ortega, now retired, agreed to accompany her. Rosefield was a small, remote town where GPS went quiet and cell reception failed. Cabin 15 was nearly abandoned, its roof slanted, paint peeling. Inside, beneath the bed, Ortega found a small wooden box locked by a code. Emily typed 3 letters, EMI. It clicked open. Inside was a journal, handwritten pages streaked with water stains. "The day you were born, I never got to see you. They said you needed medical tests. But 4 days passed, and they never brought you back. I signed myself out. I searched everywhere, but every record was gone. I had no money, no power, only the belief that someday you'd find your way home." Emily closed the journal, her hands trembling. Ortega rested a hand on her shoulder. "A part of your past just spoke." Back at the Grace Foundation, Emily said nothing for days. Then she gathered her investigative team. She reopened the files and launched a new initiative, the Mother's Name Project, focused on restoring birth mother information in wiped hospital records over the last 20 years. Sarah, now both director and research lead, took point. In a meeting, she said, "We've identified 47 cases where adoptive mothers were falsely listed as birth mothers. 15 of them match the fraudulent pattern linked to Victoria." Emily gripped her pen. "We thought Victoria was the mastermind, but if this is a network, then we've only cut a branch. We haven't touched the root." A national investigation was launched. Though retired, Ortega returned as honorary advisor. Sarah and Benji established the Data Recovery Division, focusing on restoring deleted hospital records and retrieving rare paper documents. What they uncovered was staggering. A former medical research group, Nova Genesis, had operated secretly under the guise of genetic studies. They had partnered with child-swapping rings across multiple states. In an old Kansas archive, Sarah found a recording of a 2006 meeting. Leonard Gresham's voice was unmistakable. So was a woman's, identified as the former CFO of Rosefield Medical Center. She whispered, As long as they don't know, we can turn any child into whoever we want. As long as the mole is right and the papers are clean. Emily broke down hearing it. Every cell in her body flashed back to that morning in the Harrison woods, kneeling beside the box that held her. It wasn't just me. There are hundreds. Grace Foundation, once a humble non-profit, became the first U.S. organization to offer national identity matching via DNA for undocumented children. Congress invited Emily to testify. In her speech, she said, "We need laws to dismantle networks like Nova Genesis, but more importantly, we must remember, a child without papers, without a name is still a child, and still has the right to live as who they are." The chamber gave a standing ovation. Lawmakers, activists, and parents wiped away tears. Henry, now silver-haired, stood backstage, eyes wet. "My daughter. She's done more than anyone ever imagined." Mason Drake was honored as a contributing whistleblower. Ortega returned to the mountains with his wife. But before leaving, he told Emily, "You didn't just reclaim your name. You forced the world to look where it once looked away." Emily knew the journey wasn't over, but now, she was no longer alone. Every child she rescued, every story she restored, was another flame. Together, they lit the way back to humanity. When asked if she ever felt tired, Emily always smiled. "As long as there's a child being called the wrong name, I'm not done. Every story must one day end. But when an ending becomes the beginning of someone else's hope, it's no longer just a conclusion. It's a living legacy." And Emily left one for the entire world. 2 years after Nova Genesis was dismantled and the U.S. Congress passed the Child Identity Protection Act, Emily stood in front of a newly built facility on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., the official headquarters of the Grace Alliance Network, born from the roots of the Grace Foundation. The building had been funded by donations from over 1.7 million people, each of them once helped by Emily or her organization. Each person contributed a brick, a thank you note, or simply a handwritten letter. That evening, Emily hosted a gathering, no press, no cameras, just a quiet circle of people who had once been lost files, now activists, doctors, teachers, lawyers, surrounding her in solidarity. A space where everyone had the right to share their story, and every story had once been nameless. Henry, now frail and in a wheelchair, was there too. He remained silent through most of the night, until Emily knelt beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. He looked at her and said gently, "I once thought I built an empire, but you built a world worth living in." Emily bowed her head, took his hand. "I'm just trying to return the names that were stolen." That night, Emily returned to her old room at the original Grace Foundation farm, the place where it all began. She opened a drawer and pulled out her one-eyed teddy bear, the same one she'd carried through the woods. She placed it on her desk, next to a black and white photo, her and Henry embracing at the opening ceremony of the first Grace Foundation. A little while later, Sarah and Benji joined her. They sat quietly, watching the dark fields outside, where the only light came from a small lamp above the gate, always left on as a promise. No one would ever be lost again. "Do you think we've gone as far as we can?" Benji asked. Emily smiled, shook her head. "No, but I'm not walking alone anymore." Outside, a bus pulled up. A young girl with curly hair and a tattered cloth bag stepped off. She looked at the sign, Grace Foundation, then turned to the driver. "I heard someone here used to be like me." The driver nodded toward the lit house. "She's still there, still waiting." And like a perfect quiet loop of fate, Emily opened the door. Her eyes met the girl's. No promises, no introductions, just a nod and a silent welcome. You've come to the right place. Every journey must one day end. But sometimes the end of one road becomes the beginning of another, a life finally called by its true name. Before we close this story, remember, the world was not built by perfect people. It was built by ordinary ones who chose not to stay silent, who chose to believe in what's right, even when no one else did. Emily had no superpowers. She wasn't given strength. She only had belief that the right hand, extended at the right moment, can save a life. That one honest voice can bring down an entire system built on lies. She believed in her choice, even when she stood alone. So if you've ever felt too small to make a difference, remember, Emily was once just a homeless girl. But because she dared to believe in truth, she became a light for thousands. The world will always need more kindness, more people who don't look away when they see injustice. And if something in you stirred while reading this story, then maybe, just maybe, you're the next person who'll bring light to someone else. Believe in kindness, believe in truth, and above all, be brave, like Emily was. You don't have to be a hero. You just have to refuse to turn away when someone needs to be seen, needs to be called by their name, needs to be loved like a human being who matters. If one story can change the way we see life, justice, and love, this is that story. And Emily Grace Caldwell, a child once forgotten, proved this truth. Those who dare to name what is true are never forgotten. Thank you for walking with Emily to the very end. And before you leave this story, there's something I want you to know. I hope you're well, physically and emotionally. I hope you eat a warm meal tonight. I hope you sleep deeply. And I hope you know you are still worthy of love, even on the days when it feels like no one is watching. If no one said it to you today, let me be the one to say it. You matter. You are valuable.